Salutations to the Truth Core, whoever and wherever you may be on the planet. This is the third installment in the course titled Mythology 101. Right here, right now, it's a stormy, rainy day in a lost fairyland between Portugal and France, and I'm pondering, as I often do, on the trajectory of this exposition. Of course, I want you to stay with me all the way, and it's advisable to listen to these talks in a series, of course. I'll put them in a playlist. The talks are designated by the letter M. I do reflect now and then on how long this series will run. And I can assure you that it's all foreplay until we get to M31. Of course, I don't know, and I doubt that the series will run to 31 talks. So that's an insider joke. In astronomy, there's a catalog of objects visible in the night sky called the Messier catalog, after the French astronomer who compiled it. And M31, the 31st item in the list, is the Andromeda Galaxy. That happens to be, according to the current scientific myth, the most distant object visible to the naked eye, and it's said to be 2.1 million light years from Earth. So you can actually see that far with your naked eye. You can see our neighboring galaxy, which is in some respects the mate of the galaxy in which the solar system is located, which is called the Milky Way galaxy. I've also been pondering whether some of you have wondered if you might need background to what I'm saying. And of course, well, there is considerable background. It would probably take you 2 solid years of listening and reading to catch up with what I've said so far on this topic of the Sophianic versus the Semitic myth. But you're not required to do that, not at all. There's a saying in planetary tantra, take it from the top. So visualize yourself with me, of course, in the mythologist studio. And you can picture the studio as beautifully situated at the top of a mountain from which we command the entire landscape in all directions. The landscape of mythic narratives produced by the human species in order to describe to itself its origin and purpose. Yes, I do talk a lot, and I've written a lot, but you need not be concerned with that, because we have this unique view now. In the instance in which I can provide some background here and there, for instance, to previous talks or to key writings that might be helpful, I will indicate them in that unit on Nemitta entitled JLL Riffs. So there you will find images, citations, references to books, but minimally just what might be helpful if you choose to go and look at it, but you're not required to do so. Now, as I'm sitting here listening to the wind buffet at the window, it might be a good moment for me to state out front exactly what my ultimate intention is here. Well, it so happens that my intention is exactly the same as the intention stated by Klaus Schwab of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. you may know that recently, very recently, Schwab released a book called The Great Reset, and the IMF has released a manifesto on the reset with a video explaining exactly what they intend to do. There are many intentions in this manifesto, and you can read them all as threats. But those threats have yet to be accomplished. Threats are merely threats. The moment comes when a bully who's making threats has to back it up. And we'll see what happens. We're at the point now of seeing what happens as Klaus Schwab and his gang of transhumanist psychopaths try to implement their threats. And as they're doing so, I'm making a counter move. That's what this talk is all about, this series. You'll find, if you follow events on the internet, that there's increasing talk about the so-called Great Reset. It might amuse you to know that I myself introduced that meme of reset, and I developed it intensively over years, specifically between March 2011, time of the Fukushima event, and March 2014. I dedicated 3 solid years to something like 140 talks and considerable text on the subject of reset. But I was talking about a different reset, the reset of the divine experiment of the Aeon Sophia. And that theme is, of course, part of the Sophianic myth, which comes from the Aryan Caucasian races. The Sophianic myth of the mysteries and the Gnostics, as they were called, although that's not what they called themselves, is the product of the religious imagination of a certain people. So it has a particular authorship, which is the Aryan races, or the white races, which are now the minority on the planet, globally speaking. So yeah, I did that. I developed this concept of reset. It's an essential factor in planetary tantra. And there is another motif in the Great Reset of the globalists, which I have also developed at great length. The manifesto that they put out says that they are intending, threatening, to do 2 things. First, they're threatening to change what it means to be human. And second, they're threatening to organize all affairs of human life at every level using IT, informational technology. You know what that is. And I intend also to address those 2 issues. So you might consider now and then that what you're doing with me as we stand on this mountain, which is named the White Mountain of Seer, emphasis on the word white, you might consider that you're involved in something that is running in apposition and opposition to the Great Reset of the globalists. It's a counter program, and in some ways, it's a counter attack intended to provide you with what you need to know to defeat their grand scheme of world domination. Klaus and his gang, who are legion, threaten that they are going to change for you on their terms the meaning of what it is to be human. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm quite satisfied with my concept of being human, and I didn't ask them or anyone else to change it for me or to change it against my will or without my consent. But that is exactly what they claim to be doing, what they would like to do. But as I've said before, the Great Reset is an attempt to take over the world. But it is not a fait accompli. It is not a completed act. The difference between what I'm saying and what they're saying needs to be clear. They want to change what it means to be human, whether you like it or not. But I want to change what it means to be human in your mind and your life with your consent. So everything depends on your consent. One of the differences, as we'll see, between the Semitic mythology, which is a narrative of human origin and purpose, and the Sophianic mythology, is that the latter is consensual. I wrote years back in Not in His Image that millions of people adhere to Christianity, which is a version of the Semitic myth. Christianity, I wrote, is a religion embraced by millions, but rarely chosen by anyone. The Semitic myth prevails in the world today in many, many variations, some of which are not even religious, some of which are atheistic or agnostic. But the fact remains that in all those cases, that myth has been forced on people. The Sophianic myth is never, ever forced on anyone. It is your free choice to engage it or not. Also, finally, before we get back to the material, I want to emphasize that I don't mean to be intimidating or presumptive in any way when I talk about changing what it means to be human. You know, years ago in Santa Fe, well, you don't know, but I'll tell you. Years ago in Santa Fe, where I lived in a New Age community with a lot of alternative spirituality on every street corner, and a lot of people talking about how to change the world for the better, I got pretty fed up. And I said once to a number of friends at the time, hey, how about this? How about we go from talking about change and talking about what needs to change to talk that changes? Let's go to talk that actually changes things, changes the human condition. And that's what I'm doing now after all those years. That's my intention in this series. Of course, you already have your own sense of what it is to be human, what it means to be human. And the best that I can do is enhance that in some way, or perhaps broaden and deepen your sense of being human, and then you can take it from there. So all that said, let's return to the two files. I'm proceeding slowly here, remember. It's all Foreplay 2M31. So, even before we open these files, let's just take a moment to look at what's in front of us. On the left is the Semitic file. And what you notice is the size of it. It's about 4 inches high. It's a huge file. Now, look to the right, and I do emphasize right, and on that side of the table is the file titled Sophianic. And it's really small. It's about 1/4 of an inch thick. Why would that be so? Why would there be so much material in the Semitic file and so little in the Sophianic file on the right, on your right hand? Well, the answer to that question will reveal itself as we proceed. Now look again at the labels on these files. Remember that considering the mythology of all races, I read the contents of the 12 volumes, and each of the volumes was named according to a race. So, the file on the left is named according to a race. But remember that there are several names on the cover of that file. It's more specific than just one race. As a matter of fact, there's something misleading about the title in the first place. There's something about the title, Semitic, that could really throw you off. How so? Well, Semitic does not designate a race. Did you know that? It designates a linguistic group. And that linguistic group specifically, in terms of current life on Earth, consists of 3 languages: Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic. So as a matter of fact, what we're going to be looking at is a narrative that has come into the world and a vast amount of material to support that narrative, which has appeared uniquely in those 3 languages, Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic. So right off the top, even before opening the file, it's advisable to be aware that there is something misleading in that designation, Semitic. For instance, one often hears the word anti-Semitic, and to be accused of being anti-Semitic is a serious matter in our time. But literally, it means that you would be in some way against those languages or against the people who speak those 3 languages. Well, that's a bit odd. Why would you be against anyone based on the language that they speak? It's as if I said that I was anti-Portuguese because I'm against the Portuguese language. You see, there's a deceit in the word Semitic. And in order to get around that, you find other titles on the cover of the file on the left. A breakdown that brings us closer to the source materials and defines them more precisely. Remember that the volume in Mythology of All Races that concerns Semitic mythology contains a tremendous amount of material. I read the table of contents, and it doesn't specify, significantly, it doesn't specify a particular strain of material, which is the biblical mythology, the Hebrew biblical mythology. So Hebrew is the key word here. And what is Hebrew? Well, that is a racial designation. So the Hebrew people are a particular ethnic group, a small ethnic group or strain among what is known as the Semitic peoples of ancient times. And of all of those peoples who produce myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Descent of Ishtar, of all of those peoples in the ancient past, only the Hebrews survive today. That being so, bear in mind that when we open this file, which is 4 inches thick, there's actually another file within it. We're going to concentrate on that other file, which is the Hebrew biblical myth. And we're not going to look at the other vast range of myths that are designated as Semitic. Turn your attention just for a moment to the file on the right. Now, that is designated Sophianic, which is not a race. In this case, two titles are required. Aryan Caucasian, that is to say, the racial origin, the designation of the people who produced this myth. Then Sophianic as the title of the myth, and more specifically, Gnostic. So who were the Gnostics? The name means simply those who know, but those who know in a special way, and those who know about mysterious matters concerning the divine. Who are the Gnostics? Well, they were the heirs to a movement called the Magian Order, Magian. So the Magi, you may have heard that term, is the name of a class of shamans and teachers in the ancient world. They were also known as the Chaldeans. And so you have all of those designations on the cover of the small file. And each of them will reveal its significance as we proceed. So let's proceed. All I intend to do now is to list the main actors in each narrative. Who are the main actors in the Hebrew biblical mythology? Well, you go to the book of Genesis, first book in the Old Testament, and you find that there is a supreme creator God named El, or Elyon, E-L-Y-O-N. Then there are a group of deities somehow derived from that supreme entity called the Elohim. Then there is an entity called Adam. And then there are, presumably, the races of the human species that proceed from Adam. Well, that's what most people think when they read the Bible. So typically, naively, those who follow the Bible think that the human races are derived from the primal parents or the first people, Adam and Eve. But in fact, that is not the case. And once again, the very moment that you begin to investigate the Hebrew biblical mythology, you find that it is disingenuous. Deceitful is not too strong a word. It contains from the very first line a deceitful statement. It also contains a really, really significant and troublesome omission. Remember that the Hebrew biblical myth is a myth that describes the origin of the human species entirely, not just of the Hebrew people who produced it. It is race-specific in its authorship, but not in the narrative. However, and I can't tell you how bizarre and troublesome this is, the opening chapter of this narrative does not actually give the name of humanity. It implies that it's about humanity, but it doesn't actually state the name. What is the name in Hebrew for the human species? Very few people actually know this name, and it is in fact not contained in the opening chapters of Genesis. Stop and think about that for a while. Why would that be the case? Why would a mythic narrative that purports to describe the entire human species not name the principal entity? But there is a name in Hebrew for humanity. Enoshut. Now when we look at the file on the right, let's consider in a parallel the main actors in that file, the main players in the mythic narrative from the Magian order. Well, first, there is a supreme God, a supreme deity called the originator. So you might draw a parallel, just provisionally now, between El or Elyon on the left and the originator on the right. Next, there is a group of gods who are called aeons or generators. Now you might compare them to the Elohim, but be very, very careful with that parallel. Finally, it does so happen that the Sophianic myth names the human species, Anthropos. So you find that name clear up front in the Sophianic myth, whereas Enoshut, the Hebrew term for humanity, has been withheld. Now, why would that be? Well, that's the question that leads into the fourth installment in this series. So I'll pick it up there, and we'll make a closer comparison of the terms and activities that might appear to be parallel in these two myths. And we'll see the difference. Everything is in the difference. Enough said, and I'll be seeing you in the beauty to come.